The lobby of Hartfield Regional Medical Center had a café that charged $9 for a latte, and for 6 years, Hazel Crane had walked past it every single morning without going inside. She went inside that Tuesday. It wasn't an impulse she could fully explain later. Maybe it was the 12-hour overnight shift she'd just finished, the third one that week. Maybe it was the code blue at 3 a.m. that turned into a long, quiet loss, the kind that hollowed something out of you even when you'd seen it 100 times before. Or maybe it was just the smell of fresh coffee cutting through the antiseptic air when she pushed through the lobby doors, and her body, operating entirely on its own at that point, simply turned toward it. She didn't change out of her scrubs. She didn't have the energy. Her hair was pulled back in a braid that had started the night before as something neat and professional and had since migrated to a general direction of backward. There was a small bloodstain on her left sleeve from the code, and she'd tried to cover it with her arm when she walked in, then gave up. She was a nurse. She'd just come off a 12-hour shift in an emergency room. The scrubs were the proof. The café was almost empty at 7 in the morning. A handful of people sat at small tables near the windows, 2 women in business attire scrolling their phones, a man in a suit reading something on a tablet. The barista, a young woman named Kelsey, whose name Hazel remembered from all the times she'd watched her from across the lobby, gave her a warm smile. "What can I get you?" "The largest coffee you have," Hazel said. "Black, please." She paid and stepped to the side to wait, rolling her neck against the stiffness that had settled into her shoulders somewhere around hour 8. She closed her eyes for just a moment. That was when the man walked in. She heard him before she saw him, the particular cadence of someone who had never waited for anything. Moving through a space like the room itself was an inconvenience. Victor Langley was 58 years old, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than Hazel's monthly rent. He was on the hospital's board of directors. He had made a sizable donation to the new cardiac wing the year before, a fact displayed on a bronze plaque in the corridor on the 4th floor. Hazel had passed that plaque hundreds of times. She had no idea what Victor Langley looked like. She was about to find out. He came to the counter, ordered without looking at Kelsey, and stepped to the side to wait. That was when he noticed Hazel. To be precise, he noticed her scrubs. The look that crossed his face was brief but not subtle, a flicker of distaste, the kind that comes automatically, before thought, before any actual information has been processed. He took a step sideways, putting more space between them. Hazel didn't notice. She was looking at the coffee machine. "Excuse me," his voice was low and clipped. She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she had seen before on the faces of people who had confused a hospital with a hotel and were unhappy with the service. "Is that blood?" he said. She looked at her sleeve. The stain. "Yes," she said. "I just came off a night shift in the ER." "That's..." He paused, letting the pause do its work. "That's quite inappropriate, don't you think? To come in here like that?" Hazel blinked. She was very tired, and it took her a half-second longer than usual to calibrate what was happening. "I work here," she said. "I just finished my shift." "I understand that." He said it the way people say things they don't actually care to understand. "But there are standards. This is a public-facing area. You're in a café. You can't walk around like..." He gestured at her, a vague sweep of his hand that managed to encompass all of her. Like that. Kelsey had gone very still behind the counter. The 2 women at the window table had looked up from their phones. Hazel felt something tighten in her chest, not the hot anger that sometimes came in moments like this, but something colder and more exhausted, the specific fatigue of a person who has been asked, one time too many, to make herself smaller. "Sir," she said carefully, "I don't believe you have any authority over how I'm on this hospital's board," he said. "I have quite a lot of authority, actually." He said it loudly, not shouting, but at the precise volume that makes other people in a room stop and pay attention, a volume that says, "I want witnesses." "I'll be speaking with your supervisor," he continued. "This is completely unacceptable. You look like you just came out of a..." He shook his head, mouth pressing into a thin line. "I donate significant money to this institution." Significant money. And this is the standard of professionalism I encounter when I walk in for a cup of coffee? Hazel's mouth had gone dry. She was aware of the other people watching. Kelsey was looking at the counter. The women by the window were very quiet. A man who had come in sometime in the last 30 seconds was standing near the door, frozen. "I saved someone's life last night," Hazel said. She hadn't meant to say it. It came out before she could stop it. Quiet, factual, not a defense so much as a statement of reality. 3 of them, actually. "I've been on my feet since 7 o'clock yesterday evening. I came in here to get a cup of coffee." Victor Langley looked at her for a long moment. "Good for you," he said, with genuine, complete indifference. The words hit the room like a dropped tray. Kelsey's head came up. One of the women at the window made a small sound. Hazel didn't respond. She stood there with her hands at her sides and her braid half fallen and the bloodstain on her sleeve, and she looked at this man with his plaque on the 4th floor, and his $9 latte, and his complete certainty that his discomfort was more important than her existence, and she felt briefly that she might simply dissolve into the floor. "You should clean yourself up," Langley said, turning away from her as if the conversation were concluded, "before you go home. Whatever home looks like for someone in your position." That was when the door opened. The thing about Seth Mallory was that you generally heard him before you saw him, not because he was loud, but because of Ranger. Ranger was a 4-year-old Belgian Malinois with a sable coat and pale amber eyes and approximately 73 pounds of leashed, coiled attention. He wore his department vest with the small K9 unit patch on the side. His nails clicked on the café tile with the precise rhythm of a dog who has been trained to move efficiently through spaces he doesn't belong to, which is to say, every space he enters. Seth Mallory was 32, broad through the shoulders, with the particular quality of stillness that tends to develop in men who have spent years in places where stillness was a survival skill. He was in his deputy uniform, Garfield County Sheriff's Department, and he was carrying a paper bag from the diner 3 blocks away that Hazel liked, the one that did the really good breakfast sandwiches. He had planned to surprise her. They did that sometimes, met each other at the end of long shifts, showed up with food, with coffee, with the specific comfort of a familiar face. He'd texted her 20 minutes ago and she hadn't responded, which meant either she was in the middle of something or her phone was dead and he'd figured he'd just come find her. He'd seen her through the cafe window as he was crossing the lobby. He'd seen the man standing over her. He understood the body language immediately and completely, the way people who have spent time in the military and law enforcement learn to read situations the way other people read text. Fast, automatic, without having to think about it. Ranger had seen it too. The dog pressed closer to Seth's leg, not pulling, not vocalizing, just present and alert in the specific way that meant I'm paying attention. Seth pushed through the cafe door. The room registered him the way rooms tend to register men in uniform accompanied by working dogs. A subtle rearrangement of attention, a collective breath. Langley turned at the sound of the door. Seth's eyes found Hazel first, a 3-second assessment. She was okay, tired, shaken, standing her ground. Then he looked at Langley. "Sir," Seth said. His voice was conversational, easy. "Is there something going on here?" Langley, for the first time that morning, seemed uncertain about how to read a situation. He looked at Seth's uniform, the K9 vest on the dog, the badge on his chest. "I was having a conversation with this employee," Langley said carefully. "Hazel," Seth looked at her directly. "You doing okay?" "I'm fine," she said. And then, because she was honest to a fault, and always had been, "Actually, I'm not fine, but I'm fine." Seth looked at Langley for a long moment. Ranger sat down at Seth's left side without being asked, watching. "I'm going to need you to step back," Seth said to Langley. "Give her some space." Langley's chin came up. "Do you know who I am?" "I do, actually," Seth said, and something in his voice shifted very slightly, not louder, not harder, but with the quality of a sentence that has more behind it than the words themselves. "Victor Langley, board member. 3rd floor plaque, the cardiac wing." Langley blinked. "Then you understand." "I understand quite a bit," Seth said. He had set the paper bag down on one of the tables without looking away from Langley. His right hand was relaxed at his side. "I'm going to need you to give me a moment, sir. I'm going to ask you to wait." There was something in the way Seth said, "Wait," that was not a request. Langley seemed to understand this, though his expression made clear he did not appreciate it. He took one step back. Seth crossed to Hazel. He didn't say anything. He just stood next to her, shoulder to shoulder, and that was enough. She felt the tension in her spine release by several degrees, the involuntary way your body trusts the people it knows are safe. "You want your coffee?" he said quietly. "They haven't called my name yet," she said. "Hazel Crane," Kelsey said from behind the counter, her voice very steady. She held out the cup with both hands. Hazel took it. Then Seth turned back to Langley, and his expression had settled into something that Hazel had seen only a handful of times in 4 years of marriage, a particular composure that meant he had crossed some internal line from patience to purpose. "Mr. Langley," he said, "I need you to understand something. This woman has been an ER nurse at this hospital for 6 years. She worked a 12-hour overnight shift. She saves people. That's what she does. Whatever your concern is about her appearance, I need you to understand that this conversation you were having with her, the one I watched through that window for about 45 seconds, that's not going to continue." Langley had recovered some of his composure. "I appreciate your perspective," he said, with a particular careful contempt, "but I don't believe this is any concern of law enforcement." "You're right," Seth said. "This specific situation isn't why I came in here. I came in here to bring my wife breakfast." He picked up the paper bag again. "But there's another reason I'm here this morning." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. The room was very quiet. "Victor Langley," Seth said, and his voice had taken on a different quality entirely. Formal, precise, the language of official procedure. "I have a warrant here, signed by Judge Harwick, authorizing a search of records related to the Langley Foundation's 2024 donation to Hartfield Regional. This warrant is in connection with an ongoing investigation by the County Financial Crimes Unit into—" "What is this?" Langley's voice had changed. "Into a pattern of transactions that may constitute tax fraud and money laundering through charitable contributions." Seth held the warrant document steady. "I wasn't going to do this here. I was going to contact your attorney this morning, give you the chance to come in voluntarily, but since you're here—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Victor Langley stood in the middle of that café with his $9 latte going cold in his hand and the warrant being extended toward him. And for the first time in the entire morning, he said nothing. Ranger made a small sound, not quite a bark, more of an exhale, and his amber eyes stayed fixed on Langley with the calm, professional attention of a dog who has been trained to read what people do next. "My attorney," Langley started. "You're absolutely welcome to call your attorney," Seth said. "That's your right. I'm not placing you under arrest at this moment. I'm serving you documentation that you're legally required to receive. Your attorney will want to see it." He set the warrant on the table nearest Langley. Then he walked back to Hazel, picked up her coffee cup, and held it out to her. She took it with both hands. The women at the window table had not moved. Kelsey behind the counter was very busy polishing something that didn't need polishing. The man near the door had his phone in his hand and was very clearly trying to look like he wasn't filming. Victor Langley picked up the warrant document with fingers that were not entirely steady. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Hazel. She met his eyes. She didn't say anything. She was holding her coffee and standing next to her husband, and she was 30 years old, and she had worked overnight in an ER for 12 hours, and she had saved 3 lives, and she looked exactly the way she looked, bloodstain and fallen braid and all of it, and she didn't look away. He was the one who looked away. He left without his latte. For a long time after, Hazel Crane thought about that morning more than she expected to. Not the warrant, not the investigation that followed, which was real and serious, and eventually resulted in charges that were entirely Victor Langley's problem to sort out with his legal team. Not even the moment Seth walked through that door, though that moment lived in her the way good things do, warm and solid, something you return to when the night shift gets long. She thought about the women at the window table. They had watched the whole thing happen. They had the ability to speak and chose not to. She didn't blame them. She knew exactly how that felt, the paralysis of a public moment when you're not sure of the shape of things, when you're trying to calculate whether speaking up will make it better or still fall into a void. She had been that person at other times, in other situations. It was human. She understood it. But she thought about it. She thought about what it costs, the thing that happened in that café. Not the dramatic part, not the arrest warrant and the Belgian Malinois and the deputy with the paper bag of breakfast sandwiches. The part before that. The 2 minutes she had stood there while a man told her, with complete certainty, that she had no worth beyond her inconvenience to him. The moment he said "good for you" and meant nothing by it. She was not a fragile person. 6 years in emergency medicine had not left her fragile. But she knew, the way you know things that are true but inconvenient, that if Seth hadn't walked through that door, she would have taken her coffee and left. She would have gone home and told the story to Seth at the kitchen table and been angry for a while, and then gotten into bed and slept for 9 hours and come back the next morning and done her job the same way she always did, because that was what she did. She also knew that Victor Langley had done it before. You don't speak to a person the way he had spoken to her without having done it before, without some internal accounting that told you, over years of doing it and facing no consequence, that it was fine, that it was allowed, that people in scrubs with bloodstains on their sleeves existed in some other category of human than people in suits. The plaque was still on the 4th floor when the investigation became public knowledge. The hospital board voted to remove it 3 weeks later. Hazel walked past the bare wall on her way to her shift and registered the empty space and kept walking, because she had a 12-hour shift ahead of her and a patient in Bay 6 with a laceration that needed attention and approximately no time to stand in hallways, contemplating institutional decisions. But she noticed it. Seth had been the one who explained the investigation afterward, what Langley had done, the structure of it, the way charitable donations had been routed and rerouted through a foundation that existed mostly on paper, financial crimes, numbers on screens, the kind of thing that is invisible until someone starts pulling threads. His unit had been working it for 4 months. The warrant had been ready for a week. "Were you going to call his attorney that morning?" Hazel asked. "Before you came in?" "Yes," Seth said. "And then you saw him through the window." Seth had thought about that question before she asked it, she could tell. "I was going to handle it the right way regardless," he said. "But I'm not going to pretend that watching what was happening in there didn't change my timeline." She had married this man 4 years ago in a small ceremony at her parents' house in Clarksburg with 19 people in attendance and a backyard strung with lights. Her mother had rented from the hardware store. He had been out of the Marine Corps for 2 years at that point and had just started with the county. Ranger had been a puppy then. She had met Ranger before she met Seth's mother. She knew, because she had known him for 6 years and been married to him for 4, that he was the kind of person who would have followed every procedure correctly, regardless of who was standing in that café. And she knew, because she had watched his face through the window as he walked toward the door, that following procedure correctly and following procedure coldly were 2 entirely different things. He had not been cold. Kelsey, the barista, left a note at the nurse's station 2 days after the incident. Hazel found it tucked under a small coffee cup with a hand-drawn star on the side. The note said, "I'm sorry I didn't say anything. I should have. I think about it every day. You were really brave." Hazel read it 3 times and then put it in her locker, in the back where she kept the things that mattered. A photo of Seth and Ranger from last 4th of July, a card from a patient's family, a list of names she added to when she could and tried not to dwell on when she couldn't. She didn't think of herself as brave. She thought of herself as a person who had been very tired and very angry and had said the truest thing she could think of, which was that she had saved 3 lives the night before and wanted a cup of coffee. Bravery, in her experience, was often just exhaustion that had run out of space to retreat into. But she kept the note. The other thing she thought about later was Ranger. She had not been sure in the moment what Ranger made of the situation. He was a working dog. He was trained for situations that were not this. But he had sat down next to Seth's leg and watched Victor Langley with those amber eyes, and there had been something about the dog's stillness, the quality of his attention, the sense of a creature that had assessed the room and determined exactly where the source of tension was, that had said more clearly than anything else in that cafe, "I see you." Not the threat, not the man in the suit, the thing underneath it. Hazel took care of people who were scared every single day. She understood something about what it meant to be seen in your fear and not have it looked past. There were things she could not control: the hours, the understaffing, the grief of a 3 a.m. code, and the way it settled in your chest and stayed through the next morning and the one after that. The Victor Langleys, who walked through lobbies with their certainty and their bronze plaques and their complete inability to imagine that the world was made of something other than themselves. There were things she could control: showing up, doing the work, coming back, not making herself smaller to fit inside someone else's idea of who she was allowed to be. She went back to the cafe the very next morning. She had decided she liked it there, actually, made that decision with some deliberateness, because if she didn't go back, the room would belong to a version of herself she didn't want to be. She got her coffee from Kelsey, who waved and didn't charge her, and Hazel stood there and paid anyway, because that wasn't the point. Then she walked through the lobby in her scrubs and her name badge and her hair in whatever configuration it had arrived at, and she took the elevator to the 4th floor, and she started her shift. The day was already complicated before she got to her first patient, labs to review, 2 handoffs from overnight that needed attention, a family in the waiting room who had been there since midnight. She moved through it the way she always moved through it, one thing and then the next, the particular rhythm of doing work that matters because it has to. At some point in the middle of the morning, Seth texted her a photo. It was Ranger sitting in the passenger seat of the patrol unit, looking out the window with the expression that Hazel had long ago decided was the dog's version of professional resignation. The text said, "He says hi." She laughed, a real laugh, sudden and brief, in the middle of a hospital corridor with 3 things pending and a family waiting for her at the end of the hall. She typed back, "Tell him I say hi back." Then she put her phone in her pocket and walked to the end of the hall and knocked on the door and went in.